There was something that I found pretty interesting that people talk about on the internet and I've seen on YouTube videos, in addition to people just discussing all over the place. And that's going to be the success of what Nintendo does next. Now, we don't have any major information as of the time that I'm recording this video about Nintendo's next system, the Nintendo Switch successor. But what I do want to talk about is the pattern that I've seen people kind of play. A little bit conspiracy-ish, but at the same time, I do think that it's worth looking into because it's something that people have brought up even on my own stream, and in a way that was actually just asking, like saying, hey, well, what do you think about this? And it's this order, or it's more like this pattern that Nintendo has: a failure, then a success. A failure, then a success. Well, massive failure, then a massive success. So it goes in this order. Now, I saw this post on Twitter and I thought it'd be interesting to share. And I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this and have heard people talk about it as well. And they show this image with the GameCube where they talk about it starting from the GameCube and say massive failure with the GameCube. Then they go with the Nintendo Wii, massive success. So that's one to the other. And then the next system, massive failure with the Wii U. Then after that, Nintendo Switch, massive success. So Nintendo's next console, they're essentially saying that there is a pattern that Nintendo, since the GameCube, has failure, success, failure, success, failure. So they're saying, well, it's a pattern. And the funny thing about it is, while this might be somewhat, I guess, coincidence, there's not really any real pattern anymore. It's actually not relevant. And I'm going to break down exactly why, because once again, this is something that people have talked about quite some time, but I don't think they necessarily know everything. There's a lot more to it than just simple patterns. But before we get into that, what's good, everyone? OJ here. Welcome back to another video. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, and click that notification bell to get my Nintendo Switch RPG videos and more first. Let's go ahead and jump into this because, yes, I think that it's very clear that there is somewhat of a pattern here with anything that, at least that Nintendo's considered a home console, of GameCube being a massive failure. Although it was a failure for sure, but I do feel that GameCube was definitely a great system. Like, as a system, and when you look back at it, I think it was actually incredible when it comes to the GameCube. It was so well designed, and the architecture and everything. GameCube was just some great engineering, but obviously the system didn't sell more than 22 million units, right around 21, 22 million, somewhere like that. So that's not a big success, although it sold a lot of software. It did sell a lot of software for its install base, but yeah, definitely not a big success. Obviously, the Wii was a massive success, kind of lightning in a bottle. For about 4 years or so, it was pretty much on top of the world. Fell off very quickly after that. Wii U, don't need to talk about that. We've had a whole little mini documentary that I did on the Wii U's failure, so we know that was something that Nintendo just really couldn't get out of. And of course, the Nintendo Switch has been huge when it comes down to it. But the problem with this chart, and the biggest thing, if we go back to Nintendo's history, you have to look at it in this type of way. It goes into twofold: what they've done before, what else they've done with other platforms, and what they did to rectify the situation of having this failure, success, failure, success. It's actually built into the DNA of the Nintendo Switch. But if you go back and look at Nintendo's history, you start off with the NES and the Game Boy, obviously both successful. NES, 60 million units sold, pretty much had a stranglehold on the market in the 80s and very early 90s before the Super Nintendo came out. But the Game Boy just took off running. People absolutely loved it, especially because you're looking at the price when it came out. The games that were available, Tetris was a huge success, and it didn't take a ton of batteries, and it lasted for a while. Kind of outdated even with its tech back then. There was definitely stuff that was better, but at the same time, it was efficient, so people loved that, and parents loved to get it for their kids. Next up, the Game Boy kind of had like a little bit of a long life, right? You have the N64, which this picture or this thing that we're talking about doesn't go over that, but that was definitely seen as not as big of a success because it sold a lot less than the Super Nintendo. And even if you're looking at this, they don't include NES, they don't include Super Nintendo, they don't include N64 because maybe they're thinking that those were 3 successes in a row. So let's just start from here to paint the narrative. But even if you were going to start from, like, let's just say the N64, success, then failure, right? Success, then failure. So I guess you can go from there. But the N64 had the Game Boy Pocket, and Game Boy Color all in its lifetime as dual systems. So you had games that were coming out, of course, on the Game Boy that Nintendo would make, and other third parties, and of course you had the big first party games. And Nintendo really started to struggle in this era. Game development got longer, game development got more expensive when it comes to the cartridges, and I think that's when you truly saw the first time that Nintendo was struggling with making games on both platforms. With the Super Nintendo and with the Game Boy, it wasn't as big of a problem. With the NES and the Game Boy, wasn't as big of a problem. You can still pump out a lot of games in a very good amount of time, first and third party wise, but this is probably the generation where Nintendo started developing their modern problems with their systems, which has led probably setting this up for the massive failure, massive success, massive failure, massive success. It was the N64, because the N64 only had 380 something games, less than 400 games in the 4 or 5 years that it was active, less than 100 games per year. Games took a long time and things were just slow, especially when you compare it to the PlayStation 1. So even if you want to look at that, hey, look, they still had the Game Boy, which was incredible. Pokemon revitalized it, and it lasted way longer than maybe it should have. And then they had the Game Boy Color, which is essentially a new system, but they put it as part of the Game Boy line. It had its own exclusive games, and it sold really well. But now you look at it with the GameCube and the GBA, and the GameCube ran into some of that. There was definitely games, but there would be some times where there was droughts, and there'd be some new IPs that people necessarily weren't super fond of, or turned into system sellers like Chibi Robo. I mean, Animal Crossing was great, but stuff like Pikmin and Chibi Robo didn't move the needle like Nintendo maybe thought that it could. And the GBA got a bunch of awesome games that definitely moved the needle and led to success. So you're seeing the pattern, the real pattern that's actually developing here is that since the N64, the portable systems have taken the shine and taken a lot of the games from the home console. And then if you go to the Wii and the DS, that was the difference. That was like, okay, the blue ocean, let's get the casual games. And they were able to really leverage the success and the, I would say, new gamers that were coming in at that point. But we all knew that wouldn't last. That would not last at all. And it didn't, because it did come crashing down on the Nintendo Wii U and the 3DS. And once again, Nintendo struggled probably heavily if you go back to the N64 era, where it really started, where they were having trouble developing for this bigger, more powerful system that essentially they weren't necessarily as good with HD development. It was their first generation with HD, and they struggled. The 3DS with the 3D technology, the games weren't necessarily expensive, but they were definitely more expensive than Nintendo DS games. So that's where you're really seeing where the issues lie for Nintendo, was having that split base. And that's the real pattern that we're looking at here overall. When you look at Nintendo's next system, it has nothing to do with the pattern of failure, success, failure, success. It has everything to do with the pattern of where are the games going to? Where are the games going to? What type of games are they making? And what system is going to get that? And with the Nintendo Switch, it was a massive success because, one, the marketing was fantastic. The system, the name, everything was good with that. But it got every single game essentially made for it. All of the stuff that people would play on the portable systems, like Fire Emblem, that was relegated to that. Animal Crossing, that was relegated to that in a way. I mean, there were some console ones, but Wii U didn't get any of that. So all that stuff that made the 3DS successful and have made Nintendo portable successful over the decades that we just broke down are all going to one system. That is going to make sure that you have success, because if you look at every generation, even with their massive failures, right, with the GameCube and GBA, Nintendo sold over 100 million units combined between them. Even with the Wii U and the 3DS, Nintendo sold, I think, about 90 million or so, about 90 million units as well. So that was definitely considered a success if you look at it overall. With the overall system sold, the Switch doesn't have those issues where you're splitting the fan base, where you're splitting the games. And if you look at it, it really was a long time coming, and Nintendo actually noticed this more than a decade ago. They noticed this a while before the Nintendo Switch even came out, because in 2013, they actually combined their home console and their portable divisions to have better synergy and to create one hybrid device, because they realized we could no longer do this where we're splitting our games. It's taking too long to make games, and this was obviously the right call. So when I see stuff like, oh, failure, success, it's the pattern, oh, it's going to be a failure, it's like, well, no, because they never had any real failures with the portable side of things. And now you have that portable DNA, you have that portable base built into your home console. If all of these systems that were a failure had a real like built in, not like an extra thing like in a GBA player attachment, but if it was a real hybrid to where you bought that unit and you got all of those games on there without anything extra, where you couldn't play 3DS games, but you guys know what I'm talking about, like with the GBA player, I think those systems would have been far more successful. I think it would have been super successful. So in my opinion, that's what the Nintendo Switch did. It took that super successful portable side and the not as successful home console side, put those two together to where you get all of those games, and now you don't have to pick and choose. Now you don't have to say, okay, I'm getting the home console version or the portable version. Look, money's tight for a lot of people out there. Not everybody can afford to have both systems and buy games across them and all that. That type of way is antiquated. It's old school. It doesn't work in today's day, especially with smartphones and mobiles and PC where you can play stuff in a lot of different places. It makes no sense to be sitting here and splitting things up and having a version here and a version there. And on top of that, not even doing cross-play, cross-buy, cross stuff a lot either. So Sony also ran into that as well. Had success with the PSP and pretty much people just pirating it, but when they locked down and put out the PS Vita, they had trouble making games for the PS Vita in addition to the home console and supporting both of them, so they just said skip it, we're done when it comes down to this. So Nintendo decided to say, hey look, we're done, but we're going to do it in a little bit of a different way. We're going to combine it together and give you the best of both worlds. So when I see that people say, oh, this pattern that's going on, there really isn't any real pattern overall, because the Nintendo Switch is no longer a part of this line when it comes to dedicated home console or dedicated portable. It's a hybrid. It's a home console and it's a portable. It's both. So therefore it has its own new line, and we should kind of go from here at this point and see what happens next. But I think that as long as Nintendo has the same strategy where, hey, we're making all of our games for one device, I think that at the bare minimum will give them a very consistent, successful system over the years. Very much like how PlayStation fans kind of always pick up that next PlayStation, even if there's some issues like with the PS3. Eventually, if the games come and if Sony keeps on pumping out what they do best for their fans, I think that it will ultimately end up being great. It'll ultimately end up being okay and at least salvageable. And I think that that's what's going to start happening from this point on with the Nintendo Switch line, or with Nintendo, as long as they have one system and they're doing that for that system. So I don't really see it as just a home console thing. I see it as a hybrid portable and home console, and that's the reason why the success is there. It's the actual games and everything being built and made for that, because some people, I think, still don't understand fully that software sells hardware. Yes, you need to have marketing and concepts and all that, but at the end of the day, you got to have the big games in order to move the hardware. And with Nintendo, it's even more important to have the big software in order to move the hardware. So that's why, to me, this is no longer relevant, because you're going to get all of that software on one platform. So I don't know if the Nintendo Switch successor is going to sell as good as the Nintendo Switch. I mean, it could not. We have to see the software. We have to see what the system's about. We have to see the marketing. We have to see everything. And of course, it's just going to take time. But at the end of the day, I think they can have a baseline level of success that's going to be consistent, because all of Sony's other systems didn't sell better than the PlayStation 2. They haven't had a system that's even came close to selling as good as the PlayStation 2, but they've still had plenty of success since the PlayStation 2. And I think that that's what Nintendo's striving to kind of do. Hey, look, maybe we won't hit the massive success that we hit with the Nintendo DS or with the Nintendo Switch, but we can have a consistent sales of maybe 100 million or right around there every single generation, and sell a lot of software, sell our services, and continue to do our business the way that we've been doing it for decades now. So that's my thought process on this. What do you guys think about this disturbing pattern? What do you want to call it? Like, I'm not sure exactly what to do. I just wanted to give my own personal opinion on it, because I do see it a lot out there. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch and RPG videos right here on screen. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.